Welcome back, everybody, to our final class, class number 12 of the online free private pilot ground school. We hope that you've been enjoying the course up to this point. As always, we have moderators in the chat to answer any questions you may have about the course itself or any of the content that we are covering today. And I know that we did cover quite a bit of material, basically from the start of middle of January, that is. It's amazing how fast these 4 weeks really fly by. And I know some of the more challenging components of the course. A lot of people have problems with airspace, navigation, specifically the VORs. And then obviously the last lesson that we did, which is on flight planning as well. So these are things that are just going to take more practice. You can review the videos at any point in time because everything is recorded. And in addition to that, with the flight planning, I encourage you to continue to take a stab at it, create your own flight plans. And I guarantee you that 4-hour window that we did the other day is going to slowly start to shrink eventually. Most student pilots can get it down to about 45 minutes or an hour, but that is really just kind of knowing where the information is, how to read these different types of charts, what you're actually pulling out of the different types of charts, and basically compiling it all together and doing the math fairly quickly with the E6B. So let's go ahead and see what is on the agenda for today. As I said, this is class number 12. This is our final class. Just like day one, we have a little bit of admin stuff to go over, so not too much. It's not as lengthy, but we've got maybe 20 or 30 minutes to cover. Mainly things like how to close out the course, how do you get your wings credits, how are you supposed to get your testing endorsement, where is the test. And just so you know, if you are looking for the exam right this second, you won't see it for about an hour from now. We designed it that way so that way you can pay attention in class because the material that we're covering today is about 20% of the material will be on the exam, and these are really all safety related issues, so the FAA does kind of stress it, so that's the reason why we open it up just a little bit later, so sit tight for those that are looking for it. After that, we're going to switch gears and talk about aeromedical factors. We'll be looking at just 4 different aeromedical factors, so things like carbon monoxide poisoning. We'll also be looking at hyperventilation, altitude sickness, a few different variations of that. Those types of things. Then we're also going to look at the aeronautical decision-making model, and we'll look at the 5 hazardous attitudes, crew resource management, which is CRM. We'll talk about single pilot resource management, which is the single pilot version of CRM. We call that SRM, and that will basically wrap up the course for today. So We will get you out of here probably a little bit earlier. I anticipate going for about 2 hours today-ish, plus or minus, depending on how many questions we do have throughout the course. And then after that, I would encourage you to take the final. And as I said before, the final you can take as many times as you want. And even if you're getting an 80% or a 90%, I would still encourage you to continue taking it because it will expose you to more FAA test questions. But we'll talk about that here in just a minute. And finally, everyone always wants to know what is the catch with our free online private pilot ground school. So as I always say, you guys have access to the live streams in 3 different locations, including on our website, YouTube, and Facebook. In addition to the live streams and the live classes, you guys have access to the recordings, which we post the day after on our website. You guys have access to our quizzes, handouts, documents, final exam, and the written test endorsement. And we'll talk about the criteria here in just a moment. So at the end of the day, there really is no catch to this class. Hopefully you'll see that as we move and kind of progress week by week here. The only thing that we will do at the end of the day, as I've always said, and you'll see this in every class, is that we will terminate the free access after about 5 days after our last day of class. So our class is a little bit unusual here just because we have the holidays, and I've showed you the calendar previous to this, but our last day of class is going to be on Wednesday, December 28th, and that is actually the same day that the final exam becomes available to you. So as a quick reminder, in order to get your FAA written test endorsement from our team of instructors here, all you need to do is watch all 12 of the classes. Does not matter whether it is live or recorded. Also does not matter what platform you watch it on, our website, YouTube, or Facebook, so you can mix and match whatever works for your schedule. And then finally, when the final exam becomes available, then it's a total of 60 questions. You'll have 2.5 hours to complete it, and you just need to get an 80% or higher. If you've been following along with any of the quizzes in each of the lessons, you'll have no problem basically taking that final. As a reminder, the quiz questions are the same ones that we use for the final exam, and we basically pull them together based upon certain percentages of each of the subjects. Even if you're scoring an 80%, I encourage you to continue taking the exam, and it's going to expose you to more FAA-like test questions. At the end of the day, you just need an 80%, and you have unlimited attempts to basically make that happen. 5 days after our last day of class, we'll put everyone on Monday, January 2nd, 2023. At 11:59 p.m. Pacific Coast time. That's when we're going to basically pull down the course and the access. So that's usually enough time for everybody to take the final. I've seen people take it 10, 20, 30 times in a 5-day period and also wrap up any remaining course material that you have. Once again, the reason why we do this is it gives us a higher completion rate. Right now, we've had over 100,000 students take our class. 95% of that cohorts have actually gone on and completed the class, received the endorsement, and 99% of that group has gone on and taken the FAA written exam for the private pilot license, that is, or what we call private pilot airplane, and passed it on the first attempt. So as you know, if you need additional time, you're more than welcome to check out our private pilot lifetime membership. Final reminder as well that the lifetime membership does go away at the end of this year. We're transitioning to a subscription-based service, and this is a great deal. It also supports our nonprofit foundation. So as a reminder, everybody, including myself and the moderators that are on right now, and our technical team, customer support that helps us out, we are all volunteers, and it's a great way to kind of allow us to continue our mission to teach these free classes into 2023 and beyond. But anyways, the Private Pilot Lifetime Membership is available for a discount. And once again, that does include the Private Pilot Ground School with all the updates. That gives you access to all of our live classes, whether that's this class or in the future. And you also have access to the professionally studio recorded versions that we put together. So the difference is that the studio versions there are no intros, breaks, anything like that. We basically remove any types of, misstatements, or, sometimes I say one too many times. That's all removed or basically re-recorded. And that is then cut and edited, and that's more like 60 to 70 mini lessons instead of watching 12 3 to 3.5 hour segments. We always keep those up to date. You'll also have access to the 900 FAA-like test questions with unlimited practice quizzes and exams. Every time you guys take a quiz or an exam, the test questions are going to reset and rejumble, so they'll never be the same. You'll have access to the 24/7 instructor support, and also the FAA written test endorsement, along with the wings credits as well, based upon the same requirements just previously discussed. You also have access to all of our past webinars and our live seminars and Q&As in the future. And then as the bonus is thrown in here, you'll have access to the private pilot flight maneuvers, which is another separate course. That's basically all of the FAA required flight maneuvers that you're going to do with your flight instructor. Different types of landings and takeoffs, steep turns, emergency procedures, etc. Things that we don't actually have time to cover in this class. But it's always nice to have, and it gives you a really good preview on how to set this up and kind of chair fly these ahead of time prior to your lesson. In addition to that, the last bonus we give you is the Private Pilot Companion Guide, which is our PDF guide. It's over 900 pages in length and includes 120 pages of course notes broken down chapter by chapter, which actually matches all of our lessons here. It does include all the handouts and also the note segments. You also have access to all the supplemental material in there as well, which is a great resource. So that is it for my public service announcement. Like I said, I'll try to keep these short and sweet as we have a lot of information moving forward. As always, I always have to thank all of our team of moderators here as well. So keep in mind that you know, they are doing this out of the kindness of their hearts. They are not paid to moderate your comments or anything else. A lot of them have been with us since the beginning. So on a smaller class like this, we usually get between 3,000 to 4,000 comments per class on average. And in some of our largest classes, I've seen upwards of 10,000 comments in a 4-hour period. So keep that in mind. You know, some of our largest classes that we've ever had are close to 3,000 to 4,000 people in them in the live classes. And I got to give a huge shout out, obviously, to Travis, who handles all of our IT. We got Alex, Ryan, Dominic, who's occasionally with us, and Cody as well. So thank them. They have been answering a lot of your questions and doing a great job as well. And our moderators are usually the same people that are also moderators on our Facebook group as well that you're so keen to answer. And then finally, I always have to do a super mod as well. So Missy is our super mod for this class. She's been with us through every single class. I know everyone's always asking, why is Missy? Because I have a special slide for her, Bernardo, special slide. You know, she's our NITES, and she has honestly taken every single class with us since, I want to say, what was it, March of last year when we started doing the live streams. She, you know, once again, voluntarily answers these questions and has really stepped up, and she also participates very, very actively in the Facebook group. And it's always great to have her insight as an ATP pilot and also a member of the FAST team for the FAA. That's basically a safety, it's the safety group out there. So we're hoping that our moderators will stick with us in the future. And of course, we always encourage new blood to join us as well. So if you guys are interested in moderating, now that you've taken the class, you kind of understand how this process works. You can always reach out to us on Facebook or open a help desk ticket and let us know. But once again, thank you to all the moderators. We cannot do it without you guys, okay? Missy is insane, I know. Homegirl Missy deserves her own slide. Exactly. I would put a picture, but I've always liked this picture since I found it. So satisfaction guaranteed by Missy, of course. All right, before we continue with a couple other pieces of information, I'm going to give you guys some study tips, and these are, I think, fairly helpful. I understand that we've covered a ton of information so far. All right, sorry, just had to take a drink of water there. We've covered a lot of information so far, right? And you guys have heard me talk through a lot of stuff. And as I've always said, you saw this slide on the very beginning of class, and I just want to bring it back to kind of bring it full circle here. That the way that I designed this course when it was originally designed is it's not designed to teach you the written. I don't want to teach you basically rote memorization of if you see the word pressure altitude, then the answer should always be A or B or C, right? We want you guys to basically use the information and then you know, try to use it in more of a scenario-based world, which is really what your practical exam is based off of. Your oral and your practical, which is also known as your check ride, is considered a scenario-based exam. So, for example, instead of asking you what are the currency requirements to carry a passenger, which is a very direct question, you might get asked something along the lines of, and keep in mind, this is not on your written, this is for your practical. A scenario-based question of that is, prove to me that you can fly this airplane for today's check ride. And keep in mind, your check ride examiner is a passenger. So that's a whole can of worms that you just opened up, where you have to talk about currency, for not only flying yourself, but flying a passenger, personal minimums. What does your license say that you can do? So for example, what is the class, the category and class of your license? Do you need any special endorsements? That would be a complete answer to that type of question. So it takes a little bit more work to kind of get to that point. But this class was designed not only to get you through the written, but it's also designed to get you through the oral and the practical as well. Take advantage of all the quizzes and the tests available to you. A lot of people said it's very helpful to go through the FAA quiz questions at the end of each chapter, so that way they can kind of see exactly what is going to be asked. So that is there for you. We've uploaded about 900 questions within just the private pilot section. And we encourage you guys to take them and review your missed test questions. If there's something that you just don't understand, or I saw the other day, and I agree with what someone posted, they basically said that the answer, or not the answer, the explanation was a little bit unclear. So if there's an unclear explanation in one of those, feel free to post it to Ask a CFI, and I responded to that individual. So it's a good opportunity to get those questions answered, so that way you guys have a clear understanding of what the question is asking. Email us those questions. Use Ask a CFI. Just take a screenshot if you need to. We're here to help. We're not going anywhere. Even though this is the last class, we are still pretty much here over 40 hours a week. You make use of the Facebook group. So right now, as I said before, this was an older slide, but we're at 13,000 people in that Facebook group, and you have a wide range. You have everybody from people who've never flown, simulator pilots, student pilots, all the way through ATP airline pilots. Instructors are in there. You have our team of staff, moderators are in there as well. It's a great opportunity to learn something. So I'd encourage you guys to, join it if you haven't. Also, with the FAA testing supplement, remember it's your friend. The reason why we put it on every single lesson is I wanted you guys to download it and pay attention to the first 20 pages, which basically has a number of legends, and it can help you answer those potential questions as well. And if you kind of go to the weather section, which is kind of in the middle part of the book, you can see exactly the TAFs and the forecasts, or a TAF is a forecast, but a TAF, a METAR, and a PIREP that they're going to ask you about. So I'd encourage you guys to take a look at that stuff. That can help you narrow down what is some of the codes that you need to know for the weather section, just like we did in class. And then at the end of the day, you do not need to know absolutely everything that came out of my mouth or everything that we covered. Remember that aviation, with all things, is really it really entails lifelong learning. This is all foundational material. I saw one person that said this was not an intro class. Unfortunately, this is an intro class. Private pilot is everything that you need to know to become a pilot, and this is everything in the basic sense of this is considered an introductory class. So if you go up in the food chain, our commercial and our instrument classes, those would obviously be more advanced classes that are not introductory. At the end of the day, most of you are going to be taking the private pilot airplane exam, which is called the PAVE, which is called the PAR. And with that, those 60 questions are basically broken down into the following. So you can kind of see that some areas there's a little bit more emphasis on than others. Usually we've got regulations, safe and efficient operations, which we're covering today. We're actually covering a lot of stuff, so stay tuned. We're also covering ADM today, and also that's about it. But you can kind of see it's usually between 5 to 10% of each category. Sometimes it's 5 to 15%, and that's how the 60 questions are made up. We've basically done the same thing. We've taken this from the FAA, and basically all of the subjects that you guys will get will fall somewhere in line with the graph that you're seeing on the left-hand side here as well. Okay. All right, so in order to schedule your FAA written exam, obviously once you guys get your written test endorsement, the test endorsement never ever expires. So if you want to hold on to it, for a day or a year or 2 years, you can always schedule this later. But keep in mind, just you guys are, when we started on basically, day 0 here, you guys should be somewhere up here, right? This is kind of the peak after 30 days of sitting through these classes. It's very much a use it or lose it. So if you're not going to be constantly studying, what you'll realize is that this will start to degrade. Your memory is going to degrade a bit. So I would encourage you guys to take the exam sooner rather than later. I know I was a perfectionist. I always used to want to study until it was like absolutely perfect. But I realized that my original intention was taking it, for example, in October, and then that turned into November, which turned into December, and so forth. So try to commit to a date that works reasonably well for yourself. And even if you guys are scoring above an 80% on our exams, I encourage you guys to keep taking them until you get a 90% or higher. That will also let you see more of the potential FAA questions that you guys, might encounter on the exam as well. So with that, the way that you're going to schedule your FAA written test is very simple. You're going to go to this website, and you don't need to write this down. This is located on our website beneath the live stream as a link as well. And all you're going to do, for most of you, you're going to create an account unless you already have an account with them. And it'll ask you for some information, social security number, etc. And then it will allow you to search the closest testing centers by your zip code. There are some internationally as well, and it does have to be done at a licensed testing center. Also keep in mind that you can price shop. I've seen prices as low as $100 to take the test and as high as $165 to take the test. Remember that you have to pay that up front, so whether you pass or fail, the testing center is still keeping their money. What you're going to do is you're going to register for, the test code is called PAR, Papa Alpha Romeo, which is the private pilot airplane. It's a total of 60 questions. You need to be 15 years of age or older to sit for the exam. So if you're like 14 and a half, just hold on to the endorsement, and then you guys can take it once you reach 15. You're going to be given 2.5 hours of time, which is more than enough for most everybody, and you need to get a 70% for the FAA. Now keep in mind, 70% is the bare minimum of passing, but I would encourage you guys to score as high as possible. Traditionally, you're going to give this your final exam or your exam to the to your actual evaluator on your check ride day, and if it's 70, they're going to have some more questions for you versus a person who showed them a 90. And there's these little PLT codes at the very bottom and these little testing codes that will tell you exactly what you missed as well. Okay, so $175. Holy moly, that went up significantly. Yep, so keep that in mind. Once you guys sit for the FAA exam, it will auto-grade it in front of you, and it will spit it out on a piece of paper. And that test is going to be valid for 24 calendar months. So if you do not basically take your check ride within 24 calendar months, you guys will have to retake the FAA written exam as well. So they give you approximately 2 years to get this done, or basically hold the results before you have to retake it. For those that have never been to a testing center, pretty standard information here. What you can bring, what you can't bring, etc. So what to bring to an FAA testing center. Number one, and I always include this stuff as an acceptable form of identification. The FAA, if we look at the table on the left-hand side, this is what they deem as acceptable. So no student IDs or anything like that. But the ID information needs to be valid or current. It needs to have all of the following: a photo, a date of birth, signature, physical, residential address. For the purposes of our U.S. students and resident aliens, this could be defined as either a state, territory, or government ID card. This could be things like your driver's permit or license. It could be a government ID card, government identification card, or for anybody in the military here, you can use your military ID as well. In place of that, you could use your passport, or for our resident aliens, you guys will need your alien residency card. For anybody here that's not hailing from the United States and may have a non-US passport, what you will need is your country's passport, whatever passport you hold, and you're going to need one of the following. You will either need a driver's permit or license issued by a U.S. state or territory, or you could also use your identification card issued by any government entity as well. Okay. The other things that you'll definitely need is you will need to bring your logbook endorsement to take the written test, so don't forget to print that out and bring that with you. They do want a physical copy of that, so this will be sent to you in email. It's also kept in your profile as well, so should you absolutely, be behind the 8 ball and you show up to the testing center, you can log into your Check Ride Prep account and you can actually probably email it to them from that location. So you guys also have that as a backup. You will also need your aviation plotter and your manual or E6B calculator. For those that actually are using the calculator, please change your batteries, make sure they're fresh prior to that. I'll also go through some other testing aids in terms of things that you are able to bring, which is, I'll just skip to that right now. So the official language from the FAA is the following. Applicants may use test aids such as scales, straight edges, protractors, plotters, navigation computers, log sheets, and all models of aviation-oriented calculating devices that are directly related to the test. In addition, applicants may use test materials provided with the test, so you guys will get a physical copy of the FAA testing supplement for private pilot. You'll also get a couple blank sheets of paper, usually a pencil as well, or a couple pencils. So that's all available to you. I've also had some of our students with who have difficulty reading some of these things ask, can I bring a magnifying glass? I have not heard of anyone being turned away for utilizing a magnifying glass. Just remember at the end of the day that it's the test proctor that makes the final determination relating to test materials and personal possessions that the applicant may take into the testing center. So if there's anything that you should not have, usually they have a little lockbox where they'll give you a key, and you guys can store it in there in between. Things that you should not bring to the testing center, very simply, cell phones. So, you can't have an E6B on a cell phone. Any type of personal notes or personal testing supplements, anything that would give you a leg up, anything that could be used for the potentiality of cheating is not allowed. You're not allowed to bring recording devices or anything like that inside of the testing center. They are monitored, and usually there's a video camera as well. Finally, the last thing for anybody that may need it is that there are some guidelines for dyslexic applicants or anybody that basically needs additional time for their test or has some type of learning disability. There is this thing called a dyslexic applicant, and it's basically an approval form. And the form would be basically utilized and sent to your local FAA field office, which is called a FSDO, your Flight Standards District Office. For those that may want to look at that, you can look at this AC. It's AC Circular 60-11 Charlie, and it gives you all the information in terms of the information that you'd have to provide to the FAA in order to potentially ask for more time or for specific test aids or other types of basically materials. Okay, so you do that ahead of time before you'd actually schedule the test, and sometimes I've heard that can take a month or two to get that all squared away, but you're not going to do that with the testing center. That is basically something that's done via the FAA. Okay? Yep, you get 2.5 hours to take the final exam. All right, moving on here. Your written test endorsement. For any of us that, for some of our students that are a bit older, that have been with us, we used to have this Google form that you filled out. That's no longer the case. So very simply, just as a reminder, in order to qualify for the FAA written test endorsement from us, what you need to do is you need to have watched all 12 lessons. It does not matter whether they were live or recorded. It also does not matter whether you watched them on YouTube, Facebook, or our website. You can mix and match whatever you need to do there. And then you need to pass the final exam with an 80% or higher. Okay, so an 80% or higher. You guys have unlimited attempts to pass the final exam. And very simply, 60 questions, 2.5 hours. It's going to do our best to try to mimic the same exam you guys would take with the official FAA test. And then all you're going to do is beneath this current lesson, I believe Travis has a final exam lesson below lesson number 12, that you would just go ahead and click on that. When you're ready, you can go ahead and start the exam, and the timer will show up as well. Okay, so if it will auto grade in front of you, and basically it will automatically send you the endorsement. Basically, the server is going to check that these two conditions are met, and if those two conditions are met, you guys will see an email endorsement that's sent directly to your inbox with whatever email you guys registered for, following that instruction there. Okay. All right, and then finally, a lot of you guys are participating in the FAA Wings Credit Program, and luckily Missy is one of the fast reps, so if you have questions about this program, she can answer them for you. But very simply, all you're going to do is at the very end of your exam, you guys will see a couple different options there, and these are located in different places. Once again, this is your submit a course evaluation. So we'd encourage you guys to do it. It does help us out. If there's any changes that you guys want to see from us, please put it in there. And we do, like I said, about 80 to 90% of all of your requests we attempt to do here. And then there's also another one that says get FAA Wings credits. And it will take you through basically step by step how to get those FAA Wings credits. Keep in mind that you do not need to take the final exam to get FAA Wings credits. So if you're just a rusty pilot sitting in on some of our classes, you're more than welcome to get those. just go to that last lesson and you'll see the Get FAA Wings credits, and it's going to take you through step by step how to do it. Very simply, if you do not have an account, this is an official government site, so you can log into faasafety.gov or gov, put in your information, and you'll basically start to accumulate your credits from that point forward. For our purposes, you will get specific ground instruction credits for this class. We do not offer flight instruction credits because we did not do any type of flight training with you guys. But basically, there's a couple different levels, basic, advanced, and master. And once you guys accumulate enough flight and ground instruction credits for each level, you can actually utilize that to bypass your flight review every 24 calendar months that is required. Once again, it will have you basically make this request directly on the FAA site, so make sure that you are logged in, or if you have an account. In addition to that, make sure that your name and everything is correct for the purposes of the FAA recording it appropriately, and then allow us about 48 to 72 hours, because we manually have to go in and make sure that you attended the course or the class, and then we actually credit it manually. It's not an automatic process on that end. Okay. All right, so any questions about the admin side in terms of anything that we've covered so far before we cover the new material with the aeromedical factors and the safety related stuff that we need to talk about? Anything else? Hopefully that'll clarify everything that you guys need to do. And then of course, if you are studying, and you forget everything that I just said in the last hour, remember, you can go back to the recording and see exactly what tests you're supposed to register for and how am I supposed to get the FAA Wings credits and all that stuff. So you guys can always do that as well. Okay. All right. Seems like everybody's good to go. All right, so the last couple of things that we're going to talk about are really safety-related factors, and this actually makes up about 15% of the exam, so pay attention to this stuff. And, you know, this is kind of, I call it like the potpourri, and there's a bunch of different topics that we're going to cover. We'll look at aeromedical factors, we'll look at working with crew members, which is called CRM, we'll look at SRM, which is single pilot resource management, and we'll also look at some hazardous attitudes and risk management as well. So that's going to be our conversation over the next hour and a half too, and we'll get you out of here a little bit early today since this is the last class. So aeromedical factors are going to be things that concern the body with the various external conditions and forces imposed on it. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to protect yourself from the factors by giving you guys a working knowledge of how your body is affected within the aviation environment. That's really the whole purpose of aeromedical factors. Now, these factors will become increasingly more important as you find yourself in IMC conditions, which is the instrument meteorological conditions. So if you guys end up becoming an instrument rated pilot and flying in your clouds, you're going to find there's a ton of different ways that your body is trying to trick you when you think that you're maybe flying straight and level. The reality is that you are doing something quite to the contrary of that. I think someone in the class threw in the Ask a CFI, why does it matter if we fly in the clouds? And I threw in this video where we've got these two guys, and this was on Ask a CFI if you guys want to watch it. You have two guys, including an instructor and a glider, and they're basically surfing in between the clouds, and to the point where they actually go through a cloud and they become so disoriented within about 10 to 15 seconds that they're upside down. I think it looks like they stall a couple times, and then it's a little bit hard to tell what ends up happening if they were even able to recover at the very end of the video as well. Okay. So very, very important that we kind of understand the basics. Now, what we're going to do is there's not too many medical conditions that we talk about. You guys will hear us talk about hypoxia, and we'll look at basically the symptoms and the treatment. We'll talk about carbon monoxide poisoning, and then we'll also talk about hyperventilation as well. So the first one is hypoxia, and there's 4 different types of hypoxia. We have hypoxic hypoxia, hypemic hypoxia, stagnant hypoxia, and histotoxic hypoxia. So 4 different types. Now, the main one, hypoxia, or hypoxic hypoxia, is going to refer to something known as altitude hypoxia, and this is just a lack of oxygen absorbed by the body due to atmospheric conditions. So very simply, if you look at the table on the right, we have basically various altitudes from 20 to 40,000 feet, and you can see time of useful consciousness could be anywhere from 30 minutes or more or greater to, if you're at 45,000 feet, you have roughly about 10 to 15 seconds to put on some type of supplemental oxygen before you lose consciousness altogether. Now, the way that this works is that as we increase our altitude, there is a partial pressure of oxygen, which is decreasing. And what's kind of interesting here is the concentration of oxygen within the atmosphere remains the same. It's 21%, whether you're at ground level or if you're, towards outer space out there. But if we increase the altitude to 18,000 feet, the partial pressure is actually reduced by 50%. And if we take that to 34,000 feet, where most airliners fly, it's actually reduced by 75%. So this is going to be a significant decrease in pressure, and that actually leads to the body's inability to absorb the actual oxygen. Now, this can occur due to a number of different reasons. Most of you are not going to be flying at these altitudes, but if you were using supplemental oxygen, it could be because of faulty equipment. Maybe you didn't check your supplemental oxygen container. Maybe you ran out. Maybe you turned on the passenger's O2, but you forgot to turn on your own, or maybe there's something broken with that piece of equipment. The other things too, or the most common, are going to be some type of depressurization event, whether it is an explosive or rapid depressurization, which is pretty obvious, or if it's going to be something a bit different, like a slow or insidious depressurization. So if you're to think about like a door on an airliner, if the door seal did not, or if the door seal did not 100% completely close, it could actually slowly start to increase the cabin altitude because it's not able to pressurize the entire aircraft as it should. And that would also be due to faulty equipment. Hypemic hypoxia is going to occur when the blood is not able to carry a sufficient amount of oxygen to the body's cells. This is traditionally caused by anemia, disease, blood loss to form blood cells, or carbon monoxide poisoning. And this also is a common result with smokers. Keep in mind that the carbon monoxide, the CO molecule, attaches itself to your blood about 200 times more easily than the oxygen molecule. So we're going to talk about CO poisoning here in a bit, but it can take up to 24 hours to recover, even if you are exposed for a short period of time. Also, in the event that you are donating blood, it can result in a higher physiological altitude. So there are some recommendations waiting up to 24, sometimes 48 hours, depending on how you are affected after you donate blood. Do not fly. We have stagnant hypoxia, which is an oxygen deficiency in the body due to poor circulation of the blood. It usually occurs with specific individuals that may have certain types of diseases, or as we age, we have our circulation just decreases and it's not as good as when we were younger. It can also occur if we're pulling excessive G's or in cold environments, which basically constrict the blood vessels. And this may reduce blood to the extremities. And in the event you have stagnant hypoxia, this could lead to something known as hyperventilation. Histotoxic hypoxia is the inability for the body to use oxygen. This is going to be due to either alcohol, drugs, narcotics, poisons, anything along those lines, usually going to be illicit substances that interfere with the body from utilizing the oxygen as it should be. All right, so a couple of things here are going to be the hypoxia symptoms and treatments. You'll notice that I've highlighted the yellow for a reason, so, knock on wood, maybe write those down. A couple of the symptoms you're usually going to see with hypoxia is going to be blue fingernails and lips. This is known as cyanosis. So very simply, if you're looking at someone or if you're looking in a mirror at yourself, you'll usually start to see this bluish, purplish in your fingernail beds and then also your lips. That's kind of a first sign. You may also feel tingling in your fingers and toes. This could lead to a headache or tightness around your forehead, numbness, drowsiness, dizziness, increased response time, increased or impaired judgment, limp muscles, and an increased response time, which is also euphoria as well. Now, keep in mind, there are some really cool YouTube videos out there for people who have experienced hypoxia. There was one with a female controller out somewhere in the Midwest where he was slurring his words and it didn't really understand. He wasn't really comprehending the instructions, and she was guiding him down to a lower altitude below 10,000 feet. And you could hear after a couple minutes after the descent, he sounded like $1,000,000. He sounded like nothing happened to him. He regained, his thought process there and was able to, fully comprehend what the instructor, not the instructor, but the ATC controller was saying. And they realized the situation of there was something wrong with the pressurization of the supplemental oxygen. And it affects them fairly quickly. It's almost like if you've ever seen anyone intoxicated before, that's very much how this individual was on that YouTube video as well. Now the treatment is very simple. Number one, descend below 10,000 feet. So that's the number one treatment. Anytime you guys have watched any of those airline movies or anything else, and there's some type of depressurization or some type of explosion, the pilots are always descending as quickly as possible to get below 10,000 feet. That's because of this rule. Also, if you have supplemental oxygen and you started to realize that you're potentially, these symptoms are starting to come on, make sure that you check the equipment, make sure you didn't run out of oxygen, make sure that the connections in the equipment are actually functioning, and then also, if necessary, select the emergency position with a diluter leveler, which basically means that you're going to get 100% oxygen from the cylinder rather than a dilution, which is a partial from the cylinder and partial from basically the airplane cabin. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and look at the next one here, and then we will take that 10-minute break. So this is carbon monoxide poisoning. Once again, pay attention to the yellow. That's my tap tap if I was in class here. So carbon monoxide poisoning, number one, these are the big symptoms you're usually going to see. Headaches, nausea, dizziness, breathlessness, collapse, loss of consciousness, even leading to death if you let it go for long enough periods. So this could have a sense of pressure in the head, drowsiness, dizziness, roaring, ringing sensation of the ears for certain individuals, confused and unable to think clear, drunk appearance, incontinence, loss of muscular power, vomiting, convulsions, and coma. Once again, this has the potential to lead to death as well. So something that's very, very serious. Usually in large storms and events, hurricanes, these type of things, we always have the news folks on the TV telling people not to barbecue in your homes and light fires in your homes, primarily because of the buildup of carbon monoxide. So where this occurs in an airplane is most likely going to be from your cabin heat. Okay, so if you're utilizing cabin heat, that's probably going to be your number one source. The second source is if you potentially have, if you're flying in certain locations, and depending on how the wind blows, I've seen in Pipers, for example, Pipers, the vent location is on the floor, and sometimes it can catch quite a bit of the exhaust if you're doing any type of slow flight maneuvers, and that will start to build up in the cockpit as well. So number one, identify the possible sources and attempt to isolate them. Open up your air vents. No matter what, always open up your air vents, every single one. If you have a window that can be opened at slower speeds, go ahead and open up. Try to flush out the cabin with fresh air. As I said before, it can take up to 24 hours to remove carbon monoxide from your system. Even after you remove it, it's about 0.5% is removed from your blood every 4 hours. So it's still considered emergency, even if you're feeling better, you don't want to continue your flight. If you have supplemental oxygen, make sure that you use 100% and open up those windows again. Turn off your heater if you're utilizing your heater. Monitor for further respiratory distress. Let ATC know that you suspect CO poisoning, regardless of if you're declaring an emergency or not. Just let them know what's going on. If you feel that it warrants it in the situation, you're in that type of situation, do not hesitate to declare an emergency. And in all conditions, whether you think you got a little bit of exposure or a lot of exposure, you want to land as soon as possible. Okay. So as I said before, even if you ventilate the cabin, that does not necessarily solve the problem, and you're not going to be operating at your peak efficiency when you guys do that. All right, so here's your FAA test question before we go on the break right here. So large accumulations of carbon monoxide in the human body, open this one up, will result in, is it A, tightness across the forehead, B, loss of muscular power, or C, an increased sense of well-being? All right, got the first third of the class in so far. There's 50%. There's 75%. The stragglers now. Here's 90%. Just wait here. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at it. Apologize if I cut off anyone. We got 16% with A's, 79% of the class with B, and just a couple people on C there. So majority of the class does have it correct. So anytime we're talking about carbon monoxide, one of the things that I was kind of clicking away at with my taps was loss of muscular power. So remember that large accumulations of carbon monoxide in the body will result in a loss of muscular power, vomiting, convulsions, and coma, eventually leading to death. If anybody said A or B, A and B are obviously incorrect because both of those are dealing with hypoxia. So for A, hypoxia gives you an increased sense of well-being, and stress could result in tightness across the forehead. So that's the reason why A is incorrect. And C is incorrect because hypoxia gives you, once again, it's really the same type of situation. It's giving you that increased sense of well-being. Stress is usually going to be associated with the tightness across the forehead that we all feel at the end of the day. All right, so with that, what we're going to do is we are going to take a quick 10-minute break. So feel free to go ahead and stretch your legs, your final recaffeinate, rebourbonate, reburinate, whatever your beverage of choice is out there. When we continue, we've got a few more aeromedical things to cover, and then we're going to switch gears and talk about risk management. So with that, stretch your legs, and I'll see everybody back in 10. Hey, welcome back from break. Hopefully you had a chance to stretch your legs. We're going to push on with our aeromedical factors. So the last one that we're going to talk about is hyperventilation. So hyperventilation is an abnormal increase in the volume of air breathed in and out of the lungs. I think a nurse told me this once. The normal respiratory rate is somewhere between like 10 to 20 breaths per minute. So I'm assuming it's something greater than 20. And this is going to result in a significant decrease of your carbon dioxide content in the blood. Symptoms of hyperventilation usually subside within a few minutes after the rate and depth of breathing are consciously brought back under control. The treatment is pretty simple with this. No matter what, even if you were to just ignore the person or whatever else happens, the body is going to naturally recover from itself. Even if it passes out, it's going to naturally recover and slow the breathing rate. So if it's a worst case scenario such as that. But usually you can bring those, you can basically try to control it, and it will usually subside after a few minutes. The buildup of the carbon dioxide, the body can be hastened. You can have a person sing, talk loudly, try to control the breathing in and out. Now the purpose of this right here, you can use a paper bag that's held over the nose and mouth, is not to rebreathe the carbon dioxide. That's what a lot of people think. It's really not going to have that effect. What you're trying to do is get them to concentrate on their breathing rate. That's really all this is. Okay. So at the same time, that method of using a paper bag is not recommended unless it's absolutely necessary. And recovery, once again, is going to occur within a few minutes. If you're able to, try to remove whatever caused it. Any type of stress, panic, anxiety, if you're able to. If the source of that was some type of emergency, then as PIC, it's your job to deal with the emergency first, and go through whatever the proper emergency training that you learned previous to that is. Okay, so keep that in mind. This one's pretty simple when we look at it. The other ones that you guys will be expected to talk about, not on the written, but just some like common sense ones that examiners usually throw in there, are going to be either nausea or basically motion sickness, which is fairly common for students and also people who get into small aircraft, or some type of ears popping, pressure in the head, sinus problems, anything like that. So very simply, if you get asked those questions, number one, if it's a sinus related issue, you could do like the Valsalva maneuver, you could yawn, you could basically try to sing to try to relieve the pressure. Obviously, we do not want you ever flying or have any passengers that you're flying with any type of cold, sinus issues, anything like that, because it's going to make the problem 10 times worse in the air than it is on the ground. Okay. If you have someone that is motion sick, very simply, number one, the number one reason why people get motion sick is you're usually staring at the flight instruments as this little tiny airplane is bouncing through the sky, and those instruments are going up and down in your head. What you want to do is have the person, or if it's yourself, look outside and try to find something in the very, very far distance. What I used to tell students that get motion sickness is I would point out like a boat or something really, really specific that I want them to look at and find in the distance, and that's really getting their eyeballs out there. You also want to obviously open up an air vent, and if you have an air sickness bag, this is something that I learned from my flight instructor that trained me a number of years ago. He said, never ever show the student the sick bag, or never show your passenger the sick bag, because that gives them the opportunity to use it. I've only had one student ever throw up on me once, and it made it into the sick bag, but I had my finger right behind his seat where that air sickness bag was kept. So his 2 cents was, if you provide it to him at the right opportunity, it'll work. If you give it to him too early, you're basically encouraging them to use it. I don't know if that's 100% true, but those are another 2 situations that you want to think about as well. All right, moving on, we're going to talk about spatial disorientation and illusion. So spatial disorientation is kind of a large topic in itself. Keep in mind that we're only covering a very small chunk that's required for the private pilot. We would actually go into this in far greater depth and volume when it comes to the instrument pilot, because you are basically we need to realize why our body is tricking us, and there's plenty of reasons why. Also realize when we talk about illusions, there's over 20 different illusions. I'm only going to introduce you guys to 3 of them here, but if you guys want to read up more, in the PHAK, the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, you have all of the Aeromedical section, which is a chapter that we uploaded for you guys here. You guys can take a look at all the various illusions and how our eyes or our body is going to trick us into maybe thinking we are closer to the ground than we are, or the runway is, wider than normal or narrower than normal. Those are going to have different impacts when we look at them. But anyways, spatial disorientation is specifically going to refer to the lack of orientation with regard to position, attitude that is, so nose up, nose down, or movement of the airplane in space. At the end of the day, the body uses 3 integrated systems that work together to ascertain orientation and movement in space. The first one is known as the vestibular system, and these are organs found in the inner ear that sense position by the way that we are balanced. They also have little nerve fibers and a fluid in there as well. So depending on which way the fluid moves, then that can also have an impact, and it could trick our body. The somatosensory system is nerves in the skin, muscles, and joints that, along with hearing, sense position based on gravity, feeling, and sound. And then the final one is known as the visual system, which is our eyeballs. And this is basically the way in which we sense position based upon what we actually see. Okay, and that can actually trick us as well. So the next ones that we have for visual illusions are going to be false horizon. And a false horizon is pretty much just that. You're looking at something which you think is the horizon, but it's not truly the actual horizon. And you're basically trying to orient the plane with that false horizon, which means that you're potentially putting the plane into some type of turn, or which could lead into basically a loss of control of the aircraft. So keep in mind that the 2 biggest illusions that lead to spatial disorientation is false horizon and then autokinesis, which we'll talk about next. And these are only dealing with the visual system. So the false horizon, the most common one that people get, especially on partly cloudy days, is most people will always assume naturally their brain wants to make a cloud perfectly level with the horizon. And the reality is that if we have a mountain, most clouds are what we call sloping cloud decks, so it's not perfectly going to be level with the horizon. And if you attempt to basically orient your airplane with that cloud, assuming that it's this one right here, then you're going to be in some type of right-hand turn. The other thing as well is that this also happens at night. So if you're up further north, the Aurora Borealis is a good example. If you're in the desert and you basically have a dark scene with different types of ground lights or stars, if you try to align with it, this is very common as well. You kind of see a city off in the corner of your eye, and you're trying to align with it, and you think that the city is perfectly level, but the reality is that the way that those lights are glowing is they're almost at an angle. So once again, be careful in terms of what you're using as your horizon. And very simply, always trust your instruments. Do not trust your body, including what your eyeballs are seeing. The reason why we have your flight instruments is for this very purpose. So what you should be doing is lining it up, and you can reconfirm with, is it truly going to be a good horizon to utilize by basically looking at your attitude indicator in these circumstances. Okay. The next one that we have is the second biggest one, which is going to be our autokinesis, and this occurs when you're flying at night. If anyone here ever remembers those books from the 80s and 90s, I think they were called like Magic Eye, and you basically put the book an inch, or actually you basically put your nose right on top of the pages of the book, and then you stare at it for an extraordinary amount of time, and then magically there's an image that appears. It's kind of the same thing where at night, if you stare at some type of light for a long period of time, it's going to actually appear that light is actually moving. And what will end up happening is if you think it's a stationary light, but magically that light is moving, you as the pilot are going to say, well, my airplane is drifting away from that light. So what you're going to do is you're naturally going to want to correct and put that light back into the position that it was, which you thought it was at. Okay. So by basically realigning with this object that really is not moving, you have the potential to basically have a loss of control. And once again, that's also known as autokinesis. All right, there's some other ones that I'm going to throw in here, the most common ones. Once again, as I said before, there's 20 plus, so I would encourage you guys to take a look at them in the PHAK. The next one we have is the atmospheric illusions. And this is going to be for haze and fog. So very simply, if you are flying in any of these conditions, if you inadvertently enter fog or a cloud, you're going to feel like you suddenly pitched up. So this is training that we try to get through your head in instrument training. If you don't recognize this, what ends up happening is you could actually steepen, you could actually start to pitch up even greater and then stall the aircraft, which could also lead to basically the steep spiral as well. In rain and haze, the pilot who does not recognize these will usually basically fly a lower approach. When we see this, usually things are going to appear closer than they normally are as well. That's another problem. Ground lighting illusions, these could occur day or night. So very, very common, especially where I used to fly out of, where Camarillo is. Camarillo is a large airport. It's got 6,000 feet of runway, but right next to Camarillo, perfectly aligned with the runway, is the 101 freeway. And at certain times of the day, students have accidentally misidentified the 101 as being the airport instead of the true runway, which is, about a couple thousand feet to the left of that. So very simply, when we see long straight lights along a road or even a moving train, we like to assume that these are runways or approach lights, but they can be mistaken for them. Bright runway and approach lighting systems, especially where few lights illuminate the surrounding terrain, may also create the illusion of less distance to the runway, meaning that you think that you're closer than you truly are. The other thing that I'll also mention, regardless of day or night, is going to be the runway width. If you have a very, very narrow runway, so for example, in Harris Ranch, California, the runway is about 25 or 30 feet wide. So basically, your wings are going to be sticking out the sides on either side of the runway anyways. Because the runway is so narrow, it makes it feel like you are higher than you truly are, okay? And if you've got a super wide runway, like 26 left at Las Vegas McCarran, which is 200 feet or 250 feet wide, I'd have to go look at it again. Because the runway is so wide and so big, it will actually make you appear that you are closer to the runway, even though you may not be, okay? So there's other illusions that you'll start to get used to as well. For those out in the Midwest or parts up north, you'll also have this other lighting illusion, which is called flat light, which is basically, it makes it almost impossible to see the actual horizon. You can see the author has put in the dashed lines to basically show you the horizon. And when you look at this is still VFR conditions, amazingly enough. Okay, so just because they're VFR conditions doesn't mean that you may have, you may be at a loss to find outside references to judge the actual, aircraft position. So normally, in normal days, this is perfectly safe when you are flying VFR, but as visual references are slowly lost, the distinction between the ground, horizon, and sky become unclear, okay? This is also something that we usually see in instrument flying. There's this weird thing where on certain days you're in between these soupy layers, meaning that you climbed above one layer of clouds and then it's clear, and then there's another layer of clouds above you, and it creates kind of this flat light. And it's really, really difficult. It's kind of eerie to kind of see which way's up and down. You can't see any type of references. You're just kind of in this world where you're surrounded by white above and below you. All right, the next thing is going to be coping with spatial disorientation. So a lot of these are going to rely on additional training. So a couple of them are, and this is directly from the FAA, this resource. So number one, you want to understand what causes the illusions and obviously constantly be aware of them. Take any type of opportunity to learn about the illusions, such as maybe using a Barney chair, a Vertigon, or a virtual reality spatial disorientation demonstrator to see them. Very simply, you can also do this with your instructor as well. A lot of the instructors will tell you to put down your head, close your eyes, and will manipulate the airplane very, very slowly, and you will then tell us what you think the airplane is doing. And 9 out of 10 times it's going to be wrong. The airplane will be doing something other than what you're thinking. Always obtain and understand pre-flight weather briefings. It's very important. Make sure that you understand the conditions that you are flying into. Anytime that you're flying in marginal visibility less than 3 statute miles, or where a visible horizon is not evident, so if you're going to be flying over the water at night, or potentially over the desert at night, or anywhere, what was the one that I flew to? Anywhere east of basically anywhere in western Texas is pretty dark. These would all be, situations where you may not have a horizon that's readily evident in terms of which way is up or down. So keep in mind that when you're doing that, make sure that you have good proficiency of utilizing your flight instruments, and then always use your instruments. So trust but verify. Do not fly into adverse weather conditions if you're not basically proficient in the use of your flight instruments. So once again, if you're intending on flying at night, maintain basically your proficiency moving forward. Ensure that outside visual references, when they're used, they're reliable fixed points on the Earth's surface, so no moving trains or anything like that. Avoid sudden head movement, particularly during takeoffs, turns, and approaches to landing. Be physically turned on for a flight, and I would say that's something that should apply to any flight. We basically use an acronym called I'm Safe, and that's basically our check as pilots to make sure that we are truly safe before operating an aircraft. And I'm Safe basically stands for illness, medications, stress, alcohol, fatigue, and then emotions or eating and emotions, depending on how you read it. But just basically making sure all those in check. And remember that anytime you have any of those that pop up, if you're ill, if you're sick, if you're taking medication, if you're impaired with alcohol or drugs, if you're tired, these are all things that will make will actually increase your basically it will increase the susceptibility of spatial disorientation. And then most importantly, become proficient in the use of flight instruments and rely upon them. Trust the instruments, disregard what your body is telling you. And in addition to that, I would encourage you guys to continue with your instrument rating once you guys are done with your private. And even if you don't intend on getting your instrument rating, it's still wise to get a couple hours under your belt as you move forward. Great, so let's look at your next FAA test question. A lack of orientation with regard to the position, attitude, or movement of the aircraft in space is defined as, is it A, spatial disorientation, B, hyperventilation, or C, hypoxia? There is no weight limit to being a pilot to remain. It's just going to be whatever the weight limit is for the airplane, if it has one. Yeah, try not to use UFOs, David, as your reference. All right, we got 50% of the class in. Looking for 100%. I still have about 60, like 70% in. Fingers crossed, everybody. Missy will bake cookies for us. All right, I am going to pause it there before we get any bad juju or bad luck out there. But we do have 100%. I'm glad that we finally got one in this class. I think this is the first one. Correct answer with everybody in the class is spatial disorientation. Spatial disorientation, and it looks like we had, that is, yeah, I think we got everybody in the class to answer that. So awesome job, everyone. Missy, you've got a lot of cookies to cook, it looks like. All right, another one for you, and this one I briefly talked about. I want to test your knowledge and see if you guys remember this one. This one's a little bit harder. What is it often called when a pilot pushes his or her capabilities and the aircraft's limits by trying to maintain visual contact with the terrain and low visibility and ceiling? Is it A, scud running, B, mindset, or C, peer pressure? Thank you, everybody. I still have a great future. Awesome. Get 2 in a row. Missy delivers cookies. It should be cookies and milk then. All right, we've got about 50% of the class in so far. All right, about 80%. Waiting for a few more folks. How many of you are left compared to the beginning? That's a great question. I think still actively in the course. If we don't talk, if we're also counting people offline, you still have almost, almost about 1,800 people that take this course. So actively taking this course. We're talking about the live stream. You guys are probably a third less than when you guys started. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this one. We got 78% with A, 21% with B, and nobody on C. The A is actually have it correctly. So remember that scud running is basically pushing the capabilities of the pilot and the aircraft to its limits by trying to maintain visual contact with the terrain while trying to avoid physical contact with it. So very simply, in the example that we kind of talked about a while back in like airspace, and we talked about something known as special VFR. In our case, we have this wonderful mountain called the Conejo Grade, basically to the east of our airport. And the airport elevation is 77 feet. The Conejo Grade is around 2,100 feet-ish. And what usually ends up happening is pilots are basically trying to figure out how are they going to fly out of this airport, and they're basically competing against, they're getting closer and closer to the clouds, but also as they continue flying, the ground is getting closer and closer to the airplane. This is known as something called scud running. And what they're hoping for is basically that they may have thought that the clouds had maybe a hole somewhere, so they were attempting to get out here, but as you know, clouds move. So that hole that you may have seen 30 minutes ago may have actually disappeared, okay? We don't ever want to be in the situation of scud running. That's also the reason why, if you guys are going to be using special VFR, which is basically a special clearance that gets you out of certain airports when the visibility is less than basic VFR, remember, less than 1,000-foot ceiling or 3 statute miles, that you are reasonably certain that you can actually get out of that airport or into that airport. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about risk management. So as I said before, this is an entire class in itself. You could do, there's master's programs on risk management. And basically, at the end of the day, risk management is really just being able to, number one, identify risks, okay? Anything you do in life has risk. Anytime you hop in a car, on a bicycle, or basically do anything, there's some type of risk that's involved. And the first thing that we always try to do is we try to identify them. And then what we try to do is we try to mitigate the risks that we can potentially do, okay? So how can we, if we say that, flying at the end of the day is pretty risky, right? Let's call it very risky. How can we get it from very risky to potentially low risk? Okay, we can never really get it to zero, but there's certain things that we can do to mitigate risk and get it from very risky to basically low risk, which is one of the lower probabilities of something actually occurring or an event occurring, okay? And then we have to look at the low risk and basically figure out, okay, we've done everything in our power to basically reduce the risk as much as we can. Is whatever risk that's left acceptable for us in terms of our own abilities? So very simply, in general aviation, we make up, unfortunately, quite a bit of accidents. The main things that you're going to realize is that your takeoff and climb, along with basically your approach and landing, is really where the majority of our accidents are from. And this is really the reason why we also have that sterile cockpit rule of any time that we are basically taxiing takeoff or landing, we should be basically, not having side conversations or really just focusing in on, our job at hand as pilots, and really doing it during what we would also call the critical phases of flight. There's a couple interesting books if you guys are interested in accidents and those types of things. There's a couple of them out there. One, it kind of goes through it and basically talks about, most pilots are, until you get your first 1,000 hours under your belt, that's really when the pilots are the most risky. And it's just because you're still building your experience. You guys will be amazed that even if even if you get your ticket at 40, 50, 60 hours, you're still not going to know very much. And it's always amazing to look back and say, someone actually gave me a ticket back then, because you'll still make stupid mistakes going or basically leaving training as well. So with these accidents, there's certain things that we do, once again, to mitigate the risk. So this is your master's class of risk management boiled down into 5 minutes here. Sorry, just taking a sip of water. All right, so very simply, we always are going to have these risks, and each hazard or risk, when we're looking at it, is basically represented by one of these red arrows. And at the end of the day, we're trying to prevent this red arrow going all the way through to the other side, because over here on the right-hand side, this is basically some type of event, is what the NTSB calls it, which is something that we don't want, which could basically be an accident or an incident. And the idea behind it is very simple. The way that we basically reduce or mitigate risk is we basically put all of these different layers between us and whatever that unfortunate event is at the end of the day. So what that may mean is, if we remember what Swiss cheese looks like, we have a number of holes in Swiss cheese, and they're usually in different locations. And the idea behind it is that one of these layers of Swiss cheese is going to help us prevent the event at the end of the day and save us. And keep in mind, it's not as simple as 3 different layers. It's everything from, did you check, let's say, 3 days before the flight? Okay, so 3 days before the flight, did you check the weather? Did you do a weather briefing the day of your flight? Did you do a weight and balance? And then as you kind of go along, you're going to have a number of other different layers. Did you file a flight plan? Did you do a pre-flight? Okay. Did you do a run-up? All of these things that we're doing are basically ways to basically reduce or mitigate risk. We can't get it to zero, but everything that we do, right? The reason why we do a run-up and the reason why we check our airplane prior to doing it is we're trying to catch something before it becomes this event. And it may make, this, whatever the hazard is, it may, get through all of these, and it may be your passenger, right? Maybe your passenger that is also, looking out for other aircraft in and around the vicinity of the airplane as you guys are flying. It may have gone through all of these layers, and this layer right here was actually air traffic control, who said, hey, you have traffic 12 o'clock in a half a mile. I need you to climb immediately, because everything else didn't prevent it. The passenger didn't see it. You didn't see it, but ATC caught it because you happen to be on flight following. If you were not on flight following, you could have potentially had a head-on air-to-air accident, okay? So this is not an end-all, be-all. This is everything that you could possibly think of under the sun. This would also include, let's say, checklist. This would also include training, and the list basically goes on and on. You could have hundreds of different things that are effectively trying to prevent a loss at the end of the day. So that is risk management in a nutshell, as easy as I can potentially get it across to you, although it is a much more complicated subject. So what this leads into is something called ADM, which stands for Aeronautical Decision Making, which is a systematic approach to the mental process, both risk and stress management, used by pilots to consistently determine the best course of action in response to a given set of circumstances. While the ADM process will not eliminate errors, it will help the pilot recognize those errors and in turn enable the pilot to manage the error to minimize its effects by identifying, number 1, personal attitudes that are hazardous to safe flight. We'll talk about those 5. It also talks about learning behavior modification techniques, learning how to recognize and cope with stress, developing risk assessment. You could have your own method of kind of figuring out what the risks are for the flight. Utilizing all available resources, both in and out of the cockpit, and then also basically doing a self-evaluation of your own ADM skills, okay? This is a topic in itself, so keep in mind that there's a lot of different information that goes into it, and ADM is just one part of the risk management section that we get into. So let's talk about these hazardous attitudes. Being fit to fly is one thing, making sure that you're mentally there. But there has been a number of studies done by the FAA and NASA that have actually identified 5 hazardous attitudes that can interfere with your ability to make sound decisions and exercise authority properly. And these are the 5 that we're going to look at. So The hazardous attitudes at the end of the day contribute to poor pilot judgment and are dangerous personalities we must learn to recognize within ourselves or others. That way we can avoid situations like this where we've got this gear up landing in this beautiful location. All right, so what we've got is the first one, anti-authority. These are the folks that are the don't tell me. So this attitude is going to be found in those that do not like anyone telling them what to do. They may be resentful of having someone tell them what to do, or may regard rules, regulations, and procedures as silly or unnecessary. Keep in mind, it is sometimes it's okay to question what someone asks you, right? If you think it's appropriate to question the controller because you think it's an error you potentially didn't understand, keep in mind that that is your prerogative, but also understand that you might have been the one in error at the beginning as well, okay? So usually the rules are there for a reason. The next one that we have is impulsivity. This is the do it quickly mentality. So this is the attitude of people who frequently feel the need to do something, anything immediately. Okay. The problem with that is that you don't necessarily stop to think about what they're about to do. They don't necessarily select the best alternate. And they always basically do the first thing that comes to mind. And the first thing may not be the best thing that comes to mind. Okay. So very important that you kind of think about what are your options, A, B, or C. We see this even with people with FAA test questions. Sometimes we don't read the test question. We kind of think we've seen this test question in the past, so we kind of know that it should be this answer. So you're trying to correlate the two, but you may have missed out something. The next one that we have is invulnerability. It will not or won't happen to me. So many people feel that accidents happen to others, but never to them. And they're not naive. They realize that things happen. It's just that doesn't happen to me. And keep in mind, this is really, age is a huge contributing factor to this. Very simply, if you are 50 years of, let's say you're 50 years old, okay, and you've never had a motor vehicle accident, or you've never had anything along those lines. Well, you're not naive. You still know that motor vehicle accidents happen all the time. If you watch the news, we see that it happens. We're driving on the freeway and we see that other people, it happens to everybody else. Just we're fortunate enough that it doesn't happen to us. And while that's not, I'm not saying that's a negative because you've never been in an accident, but what ends up happening is that they really feel that, okay, I've made it the first 50 years without an accident, and I really feel that, it's not going to happen to me. It's for whatever reason, it just doesn't happen to me. These things happen to other people. And traditionally, if we relate that to the pilot world, pilots who think this way are more likely to take chances and then increase risk. Okay, I've never lost an engine, so my oils were a little low. I'm not going to lose an engine this time either, so let's just keep going. Okay, whatever the situation in this scenario is. So once again, this is the it won't happen to me. Macho or machoism. This is the I can do it attitude. And this is pilots who are always trying to prove that they are better than anyone else. And they're usually thinking, I can do it. I'll show you or I'll show them. Pilots with this attitude will try to prove themselves by taking risks in order to impress others. Whether it's a low flyby or anything else, this would be a couple examples. And then for the females in the audience, keep in mind that this pattern is usually thought to be a male characteristic, but female or women are equally susceptible to the macho attitude as well. All right, and then the final one that we've got is resignation. I think we all know an individual like this at work or in life, and it's kind of like, what's the use, right? Pilots feeling resignation do not see themselves as being able to make a great deal of difference in what happens to them. So this is kind of the, if things go well type mentality. Hey, I had good luck today. If things go badly, then I either have bad luck or someone's out to get me. Okay. They're not really taking responsibility for their actions either. We see this occasionally with some students. So the pilot is going to leave the action to others for better or for worse. And resignation, this is one that you have to correct right away. If students become overwhelmed or anything like this, and I've had students do this to me in the cockpit where we're flying in IMC conditions and we're completely off on the approach and the student just gives up and throws up their hands. And as the instructor, you're trying to get it back on track really quickly without any warning. So no matter what, there's always something that you can do. Even if it's an emergency, you guys will go through all of your emergency procedure training for the engine fire, engine failure, and so forth, all the way down to the ground from 4,000 feet or whatever altitude your instructor decides to pull the power on you. There is always something that you can do to improve the situation. You don't want to leave it to others. And you don't want to just, resign and say, hey, I lost the engine. Whatever happens at this point is, in someone else's hands. The other thing that people do in this type of mentality is that they are sometimes want to be the nice guy and they go along with unreasonable requests. So, hey, I want you to take off because I need to get to work and there's a thunderstorm at the end of the runway and I really need you to go. And they accept those types of unnecessary risks just to be the nice guy because they don't necessarily like confrontation. Okay. So those are your 5 hazardous attitudes. If you identify them in yourself or others, these are just things that you need to realize in terms of how to correct. And we'll look at the 2 FAA test questions that will revolve around just 2 of these. So what anecdotal phrase can help reverse the hazardous attitude of anti-authority? Is it A, rules do not apply in the situation, B, I know what I'm doing, or C, follow the rules? And I think what's that saying? There are old pilots and there's bold pilots, but there's no such thing as old and bold pilots. I think that's the most common one that I hear. All right, we got about 50% of the class in. What I'll do is I'll go through these 2 FAA test questions. We'll take that 5-minute break early here, and then when we come back from break, we're going to talk about personal minimums, CRM, SRM, and some other things as well. And like I said, we'll probably get you out of here a bit early today. So we're at about 75% now. Wrong button, Roberto. Hopefully you hit the right answer, even though it was the wrong button. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this one. We have 4% with A, 6% with B, and about 89% with the correct answer. So remember, the antidotal phrase, right, the opposite. So what we're looking for is the anti-authority when we're talking about this is don't tell me, okay? Don't tell me what to do. They don't like to follow the rules. The rules are usually for other people. So very simply, the opposite of that is follow the rules. They're written for a reason, okay? All right, let's go ahead and look at the next one here, and then we'll take that break. So same thing. Let me go ahead and pull up the poll. What anecdotal phrase can help reverse the hazardous attitude of invulnerability? Is it A, it will not happen to me, B, it cannot be that bad, or C, it could happen to me? Right, there is about 70%. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this one. We've got 6% with A, A couple people on B over there, and 92% of the class with the correct answer. Once again, this is a C as well, so it could happen to me. Invulnerability is it won't happen to me, and this is found in people who think accidents happen to others, but never to them. So very simply, the opposite thinking of that, or the antidote to that, is going to be it could happen to me. Okay? All right, so with that, we're going to take a break a couple minutes early here. So let's go ahead and stretch your legs, take a quick 5-minute break. When we come back, we're going to finish up the course and answer any questions you have that are outstanding. But I will see everybody back in 5. right, everybody, welcome back from break. You guys got a couple extra seconds in there, and we're going to push on to the tail end of the course here. So the way that we can kind of mitigate risk is one of the best ways we can do it is actually looking at personal minimums. And besides just looking at like fitness of flight, which is, as you guys have said, is the I'm Safe acronym. There's a lot of other things that we can look at as well. And, the one thing that we can kind of utilize is we always have legal minimums that we have to basically abide by. So remember, legal minimums could be things like I need at least 3 takeoff and landings within the preceding 90 days to carry a passenger during the day. So if you were to do all of your takeoff and landings on January 1st and then 89 days later, go ahead and fly with, let's say, your entire family in the airplane, and you haven't done any flights since then, you're still legal, but it's your very, very last day, then do you really think that you're going to make the best takeoff and landing, or do you think you're going to be proficient or safe in the process? And the answer that most people say, hopefully, is no. Okay. So there is the thing called legal minimums, and then what you have to think about is something called personal minimums, which have to be at least at the legal minimum level, if not greater. So this is a card that I made a long time ago during my training. So, you can kind of come up with your own version of this. And there's a lot of guidelines and things that you can look at. There's a bunch of FAA documents that will walk you through this process in terms of how to develop your personal minimums. And they could actually include a lot of different variables. They could include weather. Just because the legal minimum to fly is 3 statute miles and 1,000-foot ceiling, you may say, whoa, that's a little low for my personal comfort level. Maybe I want 5 statute miles visibility and a 2,000-foot ceiling. Okay, whatever the value happens to be. Instead of doing 3 takeoff and landings every 90 days, I want to do 3 takeoff and landings every 30 days because it's going to improve my proficiency. So instead of doing 3, I'll do 9 within that same time period. The other one too is with weather and those types of things. As you guys go through your training, you guys will get a bunch of limitations that you can grow upon. So very simply, every instructor out there is going to give you limitations when you solo in terms of your headwind or potentially your crosswind limits. And those will basically increase with experience. So, my crosswind limit today is no longer 9, it's actually 33 in a Cessna. And the only reason it's 33 is that's as much rudder authority as the Cessna gives me. So anything more than that, and I can't maintain the center line. And the other thing that you can also do is, just like we said with the performance information, I tell my private pilot students, really anybody that's kind of starting off private instrument, add 50% to whatever the performance charts numbers say. If it says that you need 500 feet to land, let's assume that it's going to be 1,000, or if you need 1,000 feet, let's assume it's 1,500 feet. Because those performance charts in that booklet were designed, and made when that engine was brand new and that airplane rolled off the factory line. And some test pilot came up with those numbers that have tens of thousands of hours testing these airplanes. On the flip side of it, we have ourselves, which are, for most of you student pilots, you guys have less than 50 hours in the airplane. You're not going to be able to hit the numbers exactly like the manufacturer state. And for most of us, we're not flying a brand new airplane. Most of the airplanes out there on the market are 20, 30 plus years old. And the engines are, basically used and abused. So they're not going to give you the performance exactly as the book says. Traditionally, as you kind of go through commercial, I tell my commercial students to go down to 25%, add 25% to all of your numbers. And, I still add 25% nowadays. The other thing as well is with your fuel reserves. Remember, we need 30 minutes during the day or 45 minutes at night. Those are all guidelines, or basically the legal minimums. I know students who basically say, I want 45 minutes during the day and an hour at night. So whatever you write down, the idea behind it is that you'll basically reevaluate your personal minimums every 30 days or every quarter, depending on how much you guys fly. And over time, when you basically sit down to do that evaluation, you'll go ahead and modify them based upon your additional training and your experience level, and you'll start to see these things get adjusted. The big thing behind it is that if you have personal minimums in place and the weather conditions or something basically don't allow the flight because of your personal minimums, you want to stick by that. Okay. So very simply, if I am flying out to Vegas and I know that the airport that I intend on landing at has a crosswind currently of, let's say, 10 knots or 11 knots, I don't want to take that flight. I'm basically going to forgo going on that flight or cancel that flight because I have a personal minimum of 9 knots. We don't want to flex our personal minimums when it suits us. They are basically hard limits that we basically designate, and it's our job to stay within those limits, okay? At the end of the day, when you guys first solo, you'll realize how careful you are when the instructor finally leaves the cockpit and waves goodbye. You guys will taxi really, really carefully. You're going to listen to all the radio announcements. You will write down everything. You'll triple check everything before you even take off. And the idea behind it is that, you know, you want to treat every flight as if it's your first solo, where you are triple checking everything and being very conscious of, you know, and you know, conscious of exactly all of your actions as you basically progress with the flight. So this is a way or a tool that we can kind of use, and this was something that I printed out on like a 4x5 index card. You can basically create one of these in, you can create one of these in Excel and kind of print them out. The 25 that I was referring to is 25%. So you could add 25% to all of your numbers if you're a commercial pilot or higher. I recommend everybody add 50% to your performance numbers if you are a private pilot. Okay. All right, use your checklist. All right, so let's talk about crew resource management. Back in March 27th of 1977, we had this thing in Tenerife, the airport disaster. And this was basically effectively almost a head-on collision between two aircraft that were at the same airport. And they were obviously two 747s, Boeing 747s. Now, these two airplanes were actually designated to go to a different airport, but unfortunately there's a terrorist event at that airport, so there's a lot of airplanes that got diverted to Tenerife. And Tenerife is a small airport. It's about 1,000 feet over the ocean, a little bit higher than that, and they basically had all sorts of aircraft that are effectively stacked up because the airport's not designed to have a lot of room or gates in the apron area. What ended up happening was basically the KLM aircraft. They actually had the senior chief training officer on board, and they were basically everybody was anxious to basically get to their final destinations, and the airport finally opened up, and KLM was the first to basically back taxi along the runway. Normally they would taxi using the taxiway, but obviously because they had the backlog of airplanes behind them, that was not a possibility. So very simply, KLM got instructions to back taxi, and they were basically told to back taxi and then hold in position where I drew that circle. At the same time, after just a few minutes after that, the Pan Am 747 was told to back taxi and basically to get off on taxiway 3, and then they would basically continue their taxi to the beginning of the runway via the normal taxiway route. Now, the KLM chief and the chief training officer, who was actually the captain of that flight, who was very, very anxious to get going. This is the guy that was highly experienced. He was a captain. In addition to that, he was, in most of the magazine articles and some of the advertisements for KLM as well. So he's a pretty prominent figure. And there were some miscommunications, number one. So this is the reason why we standardize English around the world for ATC communications between pilots and controllers. Number one, there was non-standard phraseology being used, and there was obviously a challenge trying to interpret some of the accents of the controller between the flight crew of the KLM jet. And the KLM jet, or the captain, heard cleared for takeoff. The first officer did not agree with that, and he said, no, I think it's something else. And the KLM captain was so anxious to get off the ground, they actually were starting their takeoff roll while the Pan Am aircraft was still back taxiing, trying to get to position number 3. Now, while all of this occurred, this was in very low visibility conditions, so you could not see down the other end of the runway due to a very, very strong fog bank that's moved over the airport. So neither airplane could see each other. All KLM could see is just basically fog straight down the runway, so it looked or appeared clear. And the Pan Am folks that were back taxiing on the same runway also didn't really see any issues as well. Now, the Pan Am crew became very concerned when they were, they kept repeating to the tower controller, we're still taxiing, we're on the runway, we're almost looking to get off. And the idea was they were supposed to make that left-hand turn on taxiway 3. And because it was so foggy, they missed the turnout, and they basically continued taxiing, and they actually got basically the first part of their nose right over or into taxiway 4, but the majority of the 747 was still located within the runway. And at that point, the KLM pilots saw the Pan Am jet, attempted to rotate, but it was too late at that point. They clipped each other, and that led to fatality, basically the fatality of 583 people who passed away in that event. So out of this, there's this very, macho attitude back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and it really was born when aviation came along. And one of the things that NASA wanted to do a couple of weeks after this event was they basically held a workshop on this topic, and they were trying to figure out what could we do different in our training. And this is where crew resource management grew out of. This was the whole philosophy of crew resource management. And eventually, they came up with crew resource management in the late 70s, and United Airlines was the first airline to actually adopt it and provide crew resource management training for its cockpit crews in 1981. Today, as of 1990, this is really the global standard, the gold standard of CRM training, and one of the big things that they teach is that there's no one individual in the cockpit that basically can act like God, right? In the olden days, pre-1980, the captain was basically the final authority figure. They basically acted like God. So if they said to fly into a thunderstorm, the flight crew and everybody on board had to go with them because they represented the final word. Nowadays, and what we usually see, especially in the United States, is it's a very collaborative effort where you have the captain and the first officer and the crew working together as a single cohesive unit, rather than one individual personality that basically takes over the flight. This was the problem with the KLM, is back in 1977, that captain and that chief training officer, they were in a disagreement about, one, the captain thought they were cleared for takeoff, the first officer disagreed, but they still went in those circumstances. Nowadays, utilizing CRM, the captain, the first officer, or even the flight attendants at certain airlines, they can actually prevent a flight from departing if they think it's some type of safety-related issue. So crew resource management is the process of coordinated action among flight crew and ground crew members, enabling effective interaction while performing flight and ground tasks. So very simply, we usually think of CRM as kind of this multi-crew environment like you guys see in the airlines. And that's true, but you guys still have to know about it. And we'll also talk about single pilot resource management here in a second. But even if you have another pilot on board the aircraft, you can use them as a resource, okay? So very simply, you might be the pilot in command, which there can only be one, but your buddy can help you with the radios or help you pull up something or load a flight plan into the GPS. Even if it's your husband or wife or, family member, friend, whoever it is that has no clue about aviation, they can still help you hold the chart. They can, free up your hands or look up something for you. And I know pilots that, they'll actually send their flight members and do like these, courses for non-aviation members, like how do you tune a radio, those types of things. So that way they can help out just when the workload is increased. Traditionally in these environments, what we see is even though the captain's on the left and the first officer's on the right, they basically are fairly equal in their powers, and it is a completely collaborative environment where even if they're running an emergency, whoever is running the emergency, meaning has the emergency checklist out, they will confirm, okay, this is the emergency checklist for engine 1 failure. And they'll actually confirm that they're running the correct checklist just to make sure they're not doing something inappropriately. So that's CRM. Now, there is always something that's called good CRM and bad CRM. What we're going to look at is an example of what is called bad CRM. This is an old 1980s training video from Continental Airlines where we have Busy Jim, who is, doing all the work, it seems. And in these types of environments, they're basically trying to highlight what would bad CRM look like. And good CRM is basically balancing workload between everybody that's involved. So making sure that a first officer or captain is not overloaded, that everybody knows what the responsibilities are. And this is also the reason why airlines like this stuff, because number one, it reduces fatalities and accidents and incidents, but they can also plug and play first officers and captains. Once you're trained on the airplane, you can basically get plugged into any crew and it'll be one cohesive unit. So with poor Jim here, keep in mind, Jim is not wearing a shoulder harness. Please do not get wrapped up in that. We know that he's not wearing a shoulder harness. This is on I think this is a 737, and they're rolling down the runway, and it's called a V1 cut, and effectively, this is actually just an engine fire. So they rotate, there's an engine fire, and magically, poor Jim is going to be inundated with all of these requests. So with that, let's go ahead and watch. We'll talk about, the pros and cons here and how we could provide good CRM to Jim, and we will chat about that when we come back.
Continental 101, taxi to position and hold.
Continental 101, position and hold.
Before takeoff, check.
Before takeoff, checklist. Takeoff announcement has been completed. Air conditioning and bleeds are set. Start switches are continuous. Auto throttle's armed. Transponder is on and the lights and strobes are on. The before takeoff checklist is complete.
Thanks, Jim.
Continental 101, you're cleared for takeoff.
Continental 101, clear for takeoff.
There we go.
And we got the lights. Power set 90%. knots. V1, rotate.
Positive rate, gear up, Jim. Jim, call a tower and tell them we've had a fire warning here. We're going out straight ahead. Jim, heading select.
Continental 101 has had a fire indication, like to proceed straight ahead.
Jim, heading select.
Stay with me, climb runway heading up to 2,000 feet.
Jim, get that.
Runway heading to 2,000.
Get that engine failure checklist out, Jim. Jim, set talk bug. Jim, flaps 5, please.
Top bug set. Flaps 1.
Turn the auto throttles off, will you, Jim? Jim, can you call the company and tell them that we've lost an engine here and we're going to have to come back?
Okay.
Flaps up, Jim. How's that checklist coming, Jim?
Engine failure, engine fire, severe damage checklist.
Would you tell the girls in the back we've lost an engine, Jim? We're going to have to return. Can you give me an after takeoff checklist, Jim?
After takeoff?
Jim, you can tell ATC we're ready to turn around and come on back in.
Houston Continental 101 is requesting a turn to downwind. Would like to come back around. We've got an engine fire indication.
Jim, I know you're...
101, this day I'd like to return turn left heading 180, maintain 2,000. This will be vectors for the final runway 14.
Left 180 and maintain 2,000.
Jim, I know you're kind of busy, but I'm real busy over here too.
All right, so as we can see, poor Jim is pretty much overworked, and obviously the captain is not relenting and really just kind of giving him thing after thing to do. It's kind of an older video. You can hear, some of the things that are less common. To call the girls in the back, let them know what's going on. There's always kind of an order of the way that things happen, and especially with engine failures and engine fires in the airlines. We're actually trained through this stuff every 6 months. We always have to do these V1 cuts and other types of things. The reality is that it's not like the movies where the fire light goes on and then they just reach up and pull the handle. We actually have to, and that was kind of the amazing thing when I went to the airlines and did the training. You actually have to pull out the manual. You have to confirm that you're selecting the right engine, and then it's like by the time you actually pull that fire handle to put out the fire, that's like number 17 or 18 on the list. There's so many other things that happen in between then. So really, the airplanes, all these modern jets out there, they can fly on a single engine, amazingly. So it's not really the time critical, nor is it critical for them to get back to the airport right away. They could actually continue circling, run all their checklist, make sure that everything is done prior to actually going back into the airport, which would be more reasonable for them to do. The other thing as well is, we talk about communication in the airlines. We talk about 2 in and 2 out. 2 in is very simply the folks inside the cockpit or inside the airplane. So obviously the 2 in would be the flight attendants in the back, and then also letting our passengers know what's going on. And then the 2 out would be air traffic control and the company. You heard them, you heard the guy say, contact the company, Jim. You could actually let ATC know that, and they actually have direct lines to each one of the airlines out there. The other thing too is it really important to let the gals know in the back what's going on. Remember, flight attendants are not there to serve drinks for everybody. That's what most passengers think nowadays. The reality is they go through quite a bit of training in basically evacuation, safety, and first aid, procedures and these types of things. And that is their number one responsibility, is really safety of the cabin itself. So that is what they're doing. As soon as they hear a bump or rumble, and someone points out that there's an engine fire or they see something, they're automatically going through their checklist, and their checklists are quite long. All they need to know from the cockpit is how long until we land, and some of those could be up to 45 minutes, and then they even have, okay, we're going to be on the ground in 10 minutes. They can basically zoom down to a 10-minute version of that checklist as well. So that's obviously bad CRM. You want to take your time. You want to explain to the other individual what we're doing. You also want to confer and confirm, and then we don't want one single individual making all of the decisions. We always basically confirm with the other party. All right, so this is the, looks like right engine number 2, fire checklist. Do you agree? You agree? Okay, let's go ahead and run that. That's really what CRM is doing, and you guys will see that more as you kind of go through the, as you guys get busier and busier. Now, what you guys will end up inevitably doing is something called SRM, which was basically born out of the CRM criteria. So SRM is Single Pilot Resource Management, and this is defined as the art and science of managing all the resources both on board the aircraft and from outside sources. This is available to single pilots prior to and during the flight, and they basically help to ensure the successful outcome of the flight. SRM training helps the pilot maintain situational awareness by managing the automation and associated aircraft control and navigation tasks. This enables the pilot to accurately assess and manage risk and make accurate and timely decisions. SRM is all about helping pilots learn how to gather information, analyze it, and make decisions in real time. You guys would hear the 3 Ps, and there's a few other variations out there that the FAA provides that will basically allow you to do this process. Although the flight is coordinated by a single person and not onboard flight crew, the use of available resources, and keep in mind your resources are just besides obviously a passenger, is you want to think about your autopilot. Your autopilot is considered a resource. So if you have an autopilot, make sure that you understand how it functions. Even if you're not relying on your autopilot for your flight training on a daily basis or anything else, by the time you guys are licensed pilots, get someone to show you how it works. So in the event you did have a situation and you needed an extra hand, at least you know how to turn the thing on. Also remember that air traffic control is a resource as well. So you can ask for help from air traffic control. They can provide instructions for you and a number of other things. And really all of these resources, whether it's the autopilot, air traffic control, or if it's your husband, wife, friend, whoever is sitting in the co-pilot seat there helping you out, that can all replicate those same principles of CRM. okay? And we don't want to start barking orders or anything else, so it's always good to basically confer with another. At the end of the day, when we're talking about ADM, aeronautical decision making, there really is no right or wrong answer. Each pilot is expected to analyze each situation in light of their experience level, personal minimums, and current physical and mental readiness level, and then make their own decision, whatever the most appropriate decision is for that precise moment of whatever you're attempting to basically work on. Okay, so with that, the next thing is really what the heck can you expect? Okay, so you guys have made it through the class, so congratulations. You guys are going to get out of here a little bit early. Once again, I'll stick around for questions. At this point, what I would encourage you guys to do is to continue taking, obviously, our exam and get over 80%. I would encourage you guys to preferably take it as many times as you need to get to 90%. If you can score 90% on our exam at least twice, 2 times in a row, then you guys will be more than ready for the FAA written exam. So go ahead and schedule the written exam, get that out of the way. Remember, your test results will be valid for 24 calendar months, so approximately 2 years. For those of you that have not started flight training or in the process, remember that the minimum amount of flight hours is 40 hours, but keep in mind the national average is closer to 65 to 75 hours, and everybody does it differently. I've only had a few students in the 40-hour range, and I've had plenty of students in the average, and I've had a couple students in the high range, in the 100-hour-ish range as well. So it just depends on how quickly you pick it up, how good is your depth perception and everything else, and how much you study before the flights. Your flight training is broken into the 3 phases. So very simply, your first phase is that pre-solo phase. We're trying to get you in the airplane, get you basic aircraft control. Can you hold an altitude to make a turn to a heading? Can you do it simultaneously? Can you make a climb and a turn at the same time, or a descent and a turn? Then we start working on your different types of basic maneuvers, such as steep turns. We also start working on different types of stalls with you. And then we look at safety as well, so emergency procedures, engine fire, engine failure. Then once we're done with that, we'll bring you closer to the ground and work on some ground reference maneuvers, usually within 1,000 feet of the ground. Make sure you can hold your altitude. And then we start bringing you over to the airport, where we start working on your landings. Okay, so I think on average, my estimation is most of my students, they basically soloed after about 100 touch and goes. So just kind of keep that in mind as kind of a basis. It's not like you're, just because you can do a perfect touch and go the first time doesn't mean they're going to cut you loose as well. And then this will eventually lead to your solo. The next phase is going to be your cross-country phase, and this is really where you're learning to fly with, further than 50 nautical miles from your home airport. You're going to work on a number of different things, different methods of navigation, pilotage, dead recking that we did in class. You'll also be taught how to utilize your navigation equipment that's installed in your aircraft, whether that is your ADF or VORs or your GPS. And then this will eventually lead to also getting signed off for your solo cross-country flights that you'll also have to do as well. And then finally, this is your final phase where we're really trying to get you ready for your practical exam. And this is just sharpening up all of your flight maneuvers for the purposes of your check ride and making sure that all of your information is good to go for the actual oral portion as well. So when it comes down to it, your practical exam is made up of 2 different components, the oral and the practical. You have to pass the oral in order to get to the practical, the airplane portion. So this is usually done with an FAA safety inspector, although 90% of you or 95% of you nowadays will do it with a DPE, a designated pilot examiner. They're basically a representative of the FAA that's an independent contractor for them that does the exams on their behalf. The first portion, like I said, is your oral portion, which is a scenario-based review of all of your private pilot requirements, what you can do, what you can't do. They're going to give you a flight plan ahead of time. If you have a really nice DPE, they'll allow you to pull the weather and do everything a couple days before your check ride. I know some of the older school DPEs, they make you still check your weather the day of and complete your flight plan, which means, unfortunately, some students get up at like 3 o'clock in the morning for an 8 a.m. check ride. So this is all scenario based, and like I said, usually 2 to 5 hours. It just depends on how quick you are and how many questions the examiner is going to ask. But all of this information can actually be found in our private pilot oral prep course that we have. So we basically include everything in there that you need to know, nothing that you would not need to know. Once you're done with that and you pass that section, you would have your practical flight, which is anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half in the airplane. Once again, it depends on how busy of airspace you are. You might get, you might be on the shorter end of this if you're kind of out in the Midwest or somewhere where there's not a lot of air traffic. If you're in the LA area, it usually starts to get longer just because of all the different traffic that we're trying to fly around. And this is where you have one opportunity to demonstrate each of the required maneuvers. It does have to be to the FAA proficiency level. There is a tolerance plus or minus, typically on an altitude, a heading, and also sometimes on a bank in terms of how much you can bank. And then they're also going to ask you to demonstrate a number of different takeoffs, landings, diversions, navigation, stalls, deep turns, emergency procedures, and the rest of it. Okay. So that is basically what you should expect moving forward. Flight training, on the most part, for most students, takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months on average, and some people can do it faster than that, and some people will extend it further. Once again, it always depends on what your budget allots or allows. All right, so with that, on behalf of our entire team here and our team of moderators, we do hope you enjoyed this course, and congratulations once again. Just because the course is ending does not mean we're disappearing. You guys always know where to find us. You can open up a help desk ticket if it's anything related to pretty much anything. You can find us in the Facebook group, or if it's some type of content related question, throw it in Ask a CFI, and I'll be happy to answer it for you. Some of you I'll be seeing on 20-minute one-on-ones this week and next week, so you're more than welcome to sign up for those as well. Remember, it's not meant as a lesson, but basically to answer any last-minute questions, career questions, anything along those lines that we can help out with, kind of give you some guidance there. But other than that, like I said, do appreciate it. Hope you guys have enjoyed this class, and I will stick around if you guys have any more questions.